My wife, Jennifer, and I had been together for years, long enough for me to know all her quirks, including her unusual hobbies. She had always been drawn to things that most people might find a little eccentric. Lately, her obsession was Japanese rope art, shibari. She spent hours studying it, practicing knots, even attending workshops. It wasn't really my thing, but I never made a fuss about it. If it made her happy, that was all that mattered. I figured everyone had their interests, and as long as she didn't expect me to get involved, I wasn't going to complain. Then came her latest idea, throwing a school-themed costume party. Jennifer had always loved events like this, putting her creative energy into planning every detail. I wasn't exactly thrilled about it. It seemed over the top, but she had that gleam in her eye, the one she got when she was all in on something. I figured, why not? A little nostalgia never hurt anyone. She spent days running errands, decorating, and making sure every detail was just right. I stayed out of the way for the most part, but when she handed me a ridiculously long shopping list and asked me to pick up supplies, I figured it was the least I could do. As I was heading out, I overheard her on the phone, chatting excitedly. Probably going over last-minute details with a friend. She was always the social one, making sure everything was perfect for her guests. The store was a madhouse. Felt like half the town had decided to shop at the same time. I pushed my way through the aisles, grabbing drinks, snacks, decorations, everything she had listed. I didn't love the idea of spending a small fortune on a party, but we didn't do this often, so I let it slide. Besides, she'd put in so much effort, I wanted her to enjoy it. By the time I got home, I could already see the decorations from the driveway. She had gone all out, streamers, fairy lights, even a huge banner draped across the porch. It looked like something straight out of an 80s high school movie. I sighed, not in frustration, but in resignation. This was going to be one of those nights. The kind where I just had to go with the flow and hope things didn't get too crazy. When I walked inside with the bags, Jennifer rushed over, her face lighting up when she saw everything I'd brought. She was buzzing with excitement, and despite my reluctance, I couldn't help but smile. At least one of us was looking forward to this. The night of the party arrived, and things took an unexpected turn. For some reason, Jennifer had changed the date. I could have sworn it was supposed to be next weekend. But before I could even process the shift in plans, our house was suddenly packed with people. Not just the usual friends I was expecting, but a ton of unfamiliar faces. Strangers were everywhere, filling our living room, the kitchen, even the backyard. I stood in the doorway, scanning the crowd, trying to figure out who half these people were and why nobody had told me. The place had been completely transformed, red plastic cups covering every surface, music blasting from the speakers, and a beer pong table set up in the kitchen. It was like a college party had invaded our home, except we were all grown adults who should have known better. Jennifer, of course, was in her element, running around making sure everyone had drinks, laughing with her friends. Meanwhile, I just grabbed a beer and found a quiet spot to stand, watching everything unfold. I wasn't the type to jump into games or be the life of the party. I preferred to stay on the sidelines, keeping an eye on things. But as the night went on, the energy shifted, people got louder, the drinking intensified, and things started getting out of hand. Then, I noticed a small group in the corner getting way too aggressive. A guy I didn't recognize, already wasted, was shouting in another man's face, someone I vaguely remembered as one of Jennifer's friends. It wasn't just drunken banter anymore, it was turning into something serious. I set my beer down and made my way over, stepping between them before it escalated into a full-blown fight. "Hey, let's chill out," I said, keeping my tone firm but not hostile. I placed a hand on each of their shoulders, trying to separate them. The drunk guy staggered back slightly, giving me a chance to pull Jennifer's friend away. Just as I was diffusing the situation, Jennifer appeared, placing a hand on the drunk guy's arm. She leaned in and whispered something to him, her expression calm and composed. Whatever she said, it worked, he relaxed, letting her guide him away from the group. She had always been good at handling these things, knowing the right words to say at the right time. I exhaled, relieved that the fight had been avoided, but the whole situation left me uneasy. This wasn't our usual kind of party. There were too many unfamiliar faces, too much chaos. And something about the way Jennifer had handled that drunk guy, how easily she led him away, how comfortable she seemed with him, didn't sit right with me. But I pushed the thought aside. Maybe I was just overthinking things. I hoped that was the case. I really did. The party eventually died down, but something about that night lingered in my mind long after the last guest had stumbled out the door. Maybe it was the way Jennifer had effortlessly handled that drunk guy, or how he had seemed just a little too comfortable in our home. But I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I had no real reason to suspect anything yet. Over the next few days, I started noticing little changes in Jennifer. Nothing dramatic, just small things that felt off. She was glued to her phone more than usual, constantly texting, scrolling, smiling at her screen like she was lost in another world. It wasn't that she never used her phone before, but now it felt different, like she was waiting for messages, eager to respond the second they came in. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe she had just gotten close to some new friends at the party. She was a social butterfly, always meeting new people, always finding someone to bond with over a shared interest. That's just who she was. But as the days passed, it started to bother me. One night, while we were sitting on the couch watching TV, she was barely paying attention. Every few minutes, her phone would buzz, and she'd pick it up immediately, typing away with a small smile. I made a casual comment about how she seemed pretty into her messages, hoping she'd at least acknowledge it. She looked up, almost startled, as if she had forgotten I was even there. "Oh, it's just a friend," she said quickly. "Someone I met at one of the Sherbari workshops. We've been exchanging ideas and techniques." She said it so nonchalantly, like it was the most normal thing in the world. But something about the way she avoided eye contact, the way she rushed through her words, made me pause. I nodded, pretending to be uninterested. "What's her name?" Jennifer hesitated for the briefest moment before answering. "His name is Adam." "His?" I didn't react, at least not outwardly. But inside, something twisted in my stomach. Jennifer had always been the kind of person who made friends easily, and most of them were women. The fact that this noob friend was a guy wasn't necessarily a problem on its own, but combined with everything else, it didn't sit right. Still, I didn't want to be the jealous, paranoid husband. I trusted Jennifer. At least, I thought I did. The next few weeks were more of the same. She was on her phone constantly, texting late at night, smiling at messages she never bothered to share with me. And then, she started going out more. At first, she'd casually mention she was meeting up with Adam to practice knots. "I promise, it's nothing serious," she'd laugh when she saw my skeptical expression. "Just two people sharing a common interest." I tried to convince myself it was true. But then she started dressing differently when she went to see him. Not anything too obvious, but enough for me to notice. A little extra effort in her hair, nicer clothes, perfume she didn't normally wear unless we were going somewhere special. She'd leave in the evenings and come home late, always cheerful, always in a good mood. I told myself I was overthinking things, that she was just excited about her hobby. But the doubt was there, and it was growing. One night, she left the house with barely an explanation, dressed up more than usual. I watched her walk out the door, my chest tight with unease. I wanted to believe she was telling the truth, that she was just going to practice knots with a friend. But deep down I knew. I just wasn't ready to face it yet. That night, she came home even later than usual. She walked in, her cheeks flushed, her energy high. She kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong, told me she and Adam had tried some new techniques and that it had been a great session. I nodded, smiled, said nothing. But that night, as she curled up beside me in bed, her breathing soft and steady, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Something wasn't right, and I needed to find out what it was. I don't know what finally pushed me over the edge. Maybe it was the way Jennifer had started pulling away, how she always seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. Maybe it was how she barely looked at me anymore, how she laughed at her phone but never shared what was so funny. Or maybe, deep down, I already knew the truth. I just needed proof. That night, long after she had fallen asleep beside me, I gave in to the urge I had been fighting for weeks. I reached over to her side of the bed, picked up her phone, and unlocked it. I told myself I wasn't the kind of guy who snoops. I told myself I was just being paranoid. But my gut had been screaming at me for too long, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. At first, everything looked normal. messages from friends, family group chats, random notifications. But then, I saw his name. Adam. I opened the thread, and instantly, my stomach dropped. At first, the messages were harmless, casual conversations, inside jokes. But as I scrolled further, I saw the shift. The messages became more personal, more intimate. Then, explicit. I can still feel you on me. You drive me crazy. I don't know how much longer I can keep this a secret. Next time, let's not stop. My vision blurred as I read through the messages. The texts painted a picture I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just a friend from her shibari workshops. This was something else entirely. And it had been happening right under my nose. I put the phone back where I found it, my hands shaking. I stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. She had been lying to me. All this time. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, had been sneaking around behind my back. And worse, she hadn't even been careful about it. She hadn't even tried to hide it properly, like she thought I was too blind, too stupid to ever catch on. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to wake her up. I wasn't going to yell or demand answers. Not yet. I needed to think. I needed to figure out what came next. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, waiting for her to wake up. I didn't touch my coffee. Didn't check my phone. I just sat there, staring at the wall, feeling nothing but cold, quiet rage. When Jennifer finally came downstairs, she was still half asleep, stretching as she walked into the kitchen. She poured herself some coffee, completely unaware that everything had changed. I let her take a sip before I finally spoke. I saw your messages. She froze, her mug halfway to her lips. Slowly, she set it down. What? I didn't repeat myself. I just watched as the realization sank in, as she scrambled to find something to say. You, she swallowed, her voice shaking. You went through my phone. That was what she cared about. That I had looked. Not that she had betrayed me. I let out a humorless laugh, shaking my head. That's what you're upset about? That I found out. Her face twisted with something between guilt and anger. Look, it's not what you think. Oh, really? I leaned forward, my voice cold. Because it looks like you've been sneaking around with Adam. It looks like you've been lying to me for weeks. It looks like you've been sleeping with him. She opened her mouth to argue, to deny it, but I saw the flicker of hesitation in her eyes. And that hesitation told me everything. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I want you to cut him off. No more messages. No more meetings. Nothing. You understand me? Jennifer's eyes flashed with something. Anger? Defiance. For a second, I thought she was going to fight me on it. But then, she just nodded. Fine. She turned away, her shoulders tense, but I wasn't done. And if you ever see him again, I said, my voice low, I swear, you won't like what happens next. She didn't respond. She just walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there alone. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt relieved. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Something felt off for weeks after our confrontation. Jennifer wasn't glued to her phone as much anymore, at least, not when I was around. She started leaving it in plain sight, as if trying to prove she had nothing to hide. But her behavior told a different story. She seemed restless, distant. Like she was waiting for something to happen. I wanted to believe that she had ended things with Adam. That my warning had been enough. But a nagging feeling in the back of my mind wouldn't let me shake the doubt. Then, one night, I came home earlier than usual. Work had been brutal all week, and by Friday, I was exhausted. I figured I'd surprise Jennifer, maybe pick up dinner on the way, try to reset things between us. Deep down, I still wanted to believe we could move past this. But as soon as I pulled into the driveway, I knew something was wrong. The house was dark, which was odd. Jennifer always left the lights on if she knew I was coming home soon. I stepped out of the car, my keys feeling heavy in my hand as I unlocked the front door. Inside, the silence was unsettling. Then, I heard it. A faint noise coming from the back of the house. At first, I thought maybe she had left the TV on, but as I walked down the hallway, the sound became clearer. Soft voices, movement. My chest tightened. The door to the spare room was slightly open, light spilling from the gap. I swallowed hard, already knowing, already feeling what I was about to find. I pushed the door open. And there she was. Jennifer. Tied up. Suspended. And right beside her, him. Adam. For a split second, my mind went blank. My breath caught in my throat as I took in the scene. Everything I had been trying to ignore, every doubt I had tried to push away, was right in front of me. The messages. The lies. The secret meetings. It had never stopped. They had never stopped. A slow wave of anger burned through me, but I forced myself to stay in control. My whole body was tense, my hands clenched at my sides as I took a deep breath. Adam froze the moment he saw me, his face draining of color. He scrambled to grab his clothes, his movements clumsy, panicked. Jennifer was shouting something, her voice urgent, but I barely heard her. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I stepped forward, grabbed Adam by the arm, and pulled him away from my wife. He barely had time to react before I shoved him back, making it clear that his time here was over. He looked at me, stammering, trying to find an excuse, but I wasn't interested. He knew exactly what he had done. I pointed toward the door. Get out. He didn't hesitate. He fumbled with his belongings, practically tripping over himself in his rush to leave. Jennifer was still calling my name, still trying to explain. But I didn't want to hear it. I turned to her, my expression unreadable. Without a word, I left the room and headed to our bedroom. I pulled an empty suitcase from the closet and started packing. By the time I walked back in, she had untangled herself from the ropes, her eyes wide and tear-filled. She looked up at me, desperate. Please, let's talk. I dropped the suitcase at her feet. Take your things and go. Her lip trembled. It's not what you think. I let out a breath, shaking my head. It's exactly what I think. She hesitated, but when she saw that I wasn't going to budge, she reached for the suitcase with shaking hands. She slowly walked to the door, stopping once to look back at me. I met her gaze without a flicker of emotion. I'm filing for divorce. We're done. She swallowed hard, then turned and walked out. The door shut behind her with a dull finality. And just like that, it was over. The days after Jennifer left were strangely quiet. The house, once filled with her voice, now felt empty. But instead of sadness, I felt something else, relief. I thought I'd feel more anger, more resentment, but the truth was, I was just done. I had spent too much time second-guessing, doubting, and trying to fix something that had been broken for a long time. Now, there was no more wondering. No more waiting for the truth to reveal itself. I had seen it with my own eyes. The first thing I did was see a lawyer. I didn't want this to drag on longer than necessary. I wanted a clean break, no drawn-out fights over property, no arguments over who was right or wrong. Jennifer didn't contest the divorce, maybe because she knew she had no defense. With every legal form I signed, every meeting with my lawyer, it felt like I was shedding the weight of the past. But that didn't mean I was free from her just yet. A few weeks after she left, Jennifer started trying to reach out again. At first, it was just small things, a text message here, a missed call there. She'd say she just wanted to talk, to explain. She wanted me to understand her side of the story. I ignored every single one. I didn't need her explanations. There was no excuse for what she did, no justification that would ever make it right. Then, she started showing up. I'd hear knocking at my door late at night, followed by her voice calling my name. I never answered. I never even looked through the peephole. One evening, she left a letter in my mailbox. Pages and pages of apologies, regrets, promises that if I gave her another chance, things would be different. I read it once. Then, I folded it back up and threw it away. Her words meant nothing to me now. It didn't matter if she was sorry. It didn't change what she had done. And I wasn't going to let her pull me back in. Around that time, I met Emily. She was a friend of a friend, someone I met at a small gathering, not a crazy party, just a quiet night with good people. She wasn't flashy, wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just real. And after everything I had been through, that was exactly what I needed. We started talking, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at ease. There were no mind games, no hidden agendas. Just simple, honest conversation. Eventually, I told her about Jennifer, about everything that had happened. I expected her to look at me differently after that, maybe to pity me or judge me. But she didn't. She just listened. No forced sympathy, no empty advice. Just listened. And somehow, that meant more than anything. Jennifer kept trying to insert herself back into my life, but I refused to give her the reaction she wanted. One day, she came to my house again. She stood outside, her eyes red, her hands shaking. "Please," she said through the door. "Just talk to me." I stood there for a moment, watching her through the window. I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. No urge to open the door. Instead, I turned away and walked back into the kitchen, where Emily was waiting. She smiled when she saw me, and just like that, Jennifer's voice faded into the background. I had already made my decision. And I wasn't looking back. I thought Jennifer would finally give up after I ignored her calls, her letters, and her late-night visits. But she wasn't done yet. One morning, I walked outside to find a long, jagged scratch running across the side of my car. It wasn't subtle. Someone had put real effort into it, making sure it was noticeable. I already knew who it was. I checked the security camera footage later that day, just to be sure. And there she was, Jennifer, creeping up to my car in the middle of the night, dragging something sharp along the paint with slow, deliberate strokes. She wanted to send a message. She wanted me to react. Instead, I came up with a plan. That evening, I called her. For the first time since she had walked out of my house, I answered. Her voice was cautious at first, then hopeful when she realized I wasn't yelling. I told her I had been thinking. That maybe we had ended things too quickly. That maybe there was something worth saving. She fell for it immediately. She agreed to come over, eager for another chance. I could hear the excitement in her voice. She thought she had won. But she had no idea what was waiting for her. When she arrived, I let her in, keeping my expression neutral. I told her Emily was out of the picture, that I had realized she was the one I really wanted. I watched as her confidence grew, as she started to believe her manipulation had worked. Then, there was a knock at the door. Jennifer's face twisted in confusion as I opened it, letting in 2 police officers. She barely had time to react before I pulled up the security footage, showing her exactly what she had done to my car. Her face went pale as she watched herself on the screen. She turned to me, panic setting in. "You set me up?" I didn't say a word. She started protesting, saying it was a misunderstanding, that she hadn't meant to do any real damage. But the officers weren't interested in her excuses. They arrested her right there in my living room. She screamed at me as they led her outside, her voice filled with rage, desperation, betrayal. But I just stood there, watching her go. She had made her choices. And now, she was finally facing the consequences. After that, things felt different. Lighter. Like a storm had passed, leaving nothing but clear skies ahead. Emily and I decided to move. A fresh start. A new home, free from the shadows of the past. As we unpacked in our new place, I looked around at the life I was building, one without lies, without betrayal, without Jennifer. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The past was behind me. And I wasn't looking back. Not ever again. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.